Okay, so this is what 8.2 number 8, and it really gets at the heart of where this is all going. Okay, so what happens is the context of the problem is an organization does a study and finds that 10% right of Americans are afraid to fly, and then they do or somebody else does, or they do a random sample of 1,400 Americans, resulting in 126 indicating they are afraid to fly. That's a population proportion. 126 divided by 1,400 is only 9%. So the question is now: has the number of is the number of people that are afraid to fly, has that decreased? Have 1% become now okay with flying? They're no longer afraid? And that's kind of a tough question because when you do a random sample, it doesn't mean that every single sample is going to have the same proportion as the mean, right? Or as the population proportion, the mean of the sample distribution. It's not that everybody's going to have exactly 10%. The question is it low enough to make us think that maybe the number of people that are afraid to fly has decreased, right? At some point it would be, um, so what we're going to say is if it's below 5%, right? If you do a sample and you get a result that given what we thought was true about the 10% afraid of flying, if you do a sample and you find out that it's less than 5% probable that something like that would happen, then we start to say, hey, maybe the population proportion has decreased, and maybe now less people are afraid of flying. I hope that makes some sense. Um, so all we do is we go to StatCrunch, right, and we plug in the details. We know how to calculate. We know that the sample proportion is going to be normally distributed, and that the mean of that distribution is going to be 10%, and the standard deviation we just calculate with the formula. We take the square root of the um, population proportion times its complement divided by the sample size, which is 1,400, and we get that the standard deviation is a little less than 1%. Okay, we key this into StatCrunch. I've already got it keyed in here. And now we just want to figure out, is getting 9% or less as the proportion of people afraid to fly, is that how probable is that? Is that less than 5% probable? And we find out it's about 10% probable. So while this is lower than kind of normal, or lower than most samples, right? It's not low enough to be like, hey, this is unusual. I'm starting to doubt that number of 0.1 as the actual proportion of Americans that are afraid to fly. I hope that helps a little bit. That's a kind of a tough concept to get.